Okay, chapter 19. I think you need to understand, you need to know what's going on in chapter 19 before we get into our lesson today. Israel's deliverance from Egypt partially fulfilled the Abrahamic covenant, but it also laid the basis for the revelation of his law. This law served as a continuation of his promises with the patriarchs and was decisively important in the history of Israel and of humanity as a whole. Moses was called by God to come to him on Mount Sinai. He told Moses, "Now if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of, of priests and a holy nation." What God is telling them is that they're his people. And we know through history in the Bible that Israel was God's chosen people. And here's where he's telling them that. Moses was told to speak these words to the Israelites. He did so. And the people agreed to do everything the Lord had said. Moses gave its Lord their answer. The Lord then told Moses he would come to him in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking, and therefore put their trust in you. The people needed to be consecrated and were told not to go to the mountain or they would be put to death. When the sign was given that God was on the mountain, it was thunder and lightning, and a thick cloud came over the mountain. God called for Moses, and he went up the mountain. The people were warned not to come up the mountain. Moses was told to get Aaron and bring him up the mountain with him. So, I have a lot of things I want to pass on to you. The purpose of the law of God was to show, number one, man's awful sinfulness in his moral distance from God. Two, man's need for a mediator if he ever was to approach God. And three, for man to know how to live more abundantly by using the unchangeable perfections of the nature of God as revealed in the moral law as his guide. And taking a closer look, I actually copied this out of my commentary rather than writing it all out. A closer look at the law. Number one, although the law has a loving spirit for its opening, and this spirit is not absent in the body of the law, it is mainly stringent and imperative in form. One course of action ought to or must be taken, because that course best reflects the character and nature of God. Like, if you look at, they always tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. That's what they're saying. It's very stringent. And number two, it makes no difference whether the law is stated negatively or positively, for the moral law is always double-sided. It commands and prohibits. For every moral act is at the same time also refraining from a contrary mode of action that should have been taken. Number three, if the mere omitting to do a thing forbidden was all that is commanded, there would be nothing moral in the matter. The command would be fulfilled just by inactivity, which in the moral sphere is but another name for death. Number four, when an evil is forbidden in one of the commandments, its opposite, good, must be understood as being encouraged. Number 5, when a command, and I have this highlighted, when a command is stated, everything contrary is virtually forbidden. For example, Calvin said that thou shalt not kill. It is not fulfilled merely by abstaining from all injury or wish to inflict injury. It means in addition that we are not to aid our neighbor's life by all that is in our power. That we are to aid our neighbor's life by all that is in our power. God forbids us to injure and hurt our brother, for he would have us hold his life to be dear and valuable to us. So when he forbids, he also at the same time demands all avenues of love that can contribute to the life of our neighbor. 6, our Lord asks, which is lawful on the Sabbath? To do good or to do evil, to save life or to destroy? And this is Luke 6:9. We conclude that to reject virtue is to choose vice. In the moral realm, more negatives do have a force of positives. Number 7, it is easier to state in few words what a believer cannot do. One's freedom to obey God opens up more possibilities than the reverse. Hence, the law can be stated negatively more succinctly. The negative form also strives to meet the strong current of evil in the human heart. I taught confirmation for 20 years. And one of my favorite lessons was the Ten Commandments. And there's some things that he doesn't bring up in here that I know that I taught the kids. So I will interject some of that. But chapter 20, verses 1 through 17 are called the Decalogue.
Yeah, I heard that.
They are traced back to Exodus 34, verse 28. The covenant written on 2 tablets, the Ten Commandments. But back then, the covenant was given on 2 tablets. And now, the Ten Commandments are going to be given on. So they're a covenant also. So let's start the lesson. The question, how would you define the purpose of laws in a society? And how are man-made laws different from God's laws? So what did you say?
Order.
Law of the land, don't speed, don't do this, don't do that.
His boundaries for behavior. Positive and negative.
If I told you that way back when they started making laws, they used the Ten Commandments as the basis.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, they didn't in
Well, for years, up until maybe the last just 5 years, they used to have the Ten Commandments in every courthouse,
yeah, and then,
every courtroom, actually. Yeah. So, when you think about the Ten Commandments, what are they? I mean, yes, our law, I have to keep peace, provide protection for all, provide recourse for a negative action, and are man-made laws different? How are they different? Man-made laws using the Ten Commandments as the basis for them. So I don't think they're any different.
Well, they're different in that our laws are changeable.
Well, that's true. His aren't.
His aren't.
But, I mean, why did God give Moses the Ten Commandments?
as a guideline for his people to live by.
True.
So as people would know that they were actually sinners.
True. Yeah. And we would know if we did went against one of the commandments or whatever, we were sinning. And we
They
need
had
that.
to know how to live and follow order.
Yeah.
Before the commandments, whatever you did, you thought might be right in your own head, but it wasn't a lot of times.
Yeah. And up until this time, God had not given him any instructions.
Mhm.
And for 400 years, they've been slaves, so
Well,
they were
and
told
yeah,
what to
and
do.
God wasn't with them. Remember that. God was quiet. He did that on purpose. Okay, going to the context. I'm not going to read it all, but it says it was exactly 3 months to the day from their departure from Egypt when they reached Sinai and camped at its base. There, the Lord made his presence known with dramatic signs, terrible thunder and lightning, the noise of loud trumpet blasts, and a thick smoke rising up and engulfing the mountain. He forbade the people to set foot on the mountain or even to approach it, for he was there, and his holiness would not permit the presence of sin. The people were filled with fear. They recognized they were in the presence of the holy God, and they were convicted of their sinful state. I can imagine, having, the lightning and thunder and everything, and then this big thing of smoke, and, I think I would be a little bit afraid too. Because they had to know, and that was God, right? And so God invited Moses up onto that mountain, and there gave him a series of commandments by which the people were to live. Through his law, God's people were given a means of access into his presence. So, starting, the first part of our reading is what they call the preamble, and that's verse. It doesn't even. I probably kind of the beginning of verse 1, although it doesn't say that. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. And he says, I am the Lord. The word translated Lord, and it's all capital letters, and you'll see that repeatedly in the Bible, that the word Lord is spelled with all caps. In the Old Testament, is translated Jehovah, meaning the existing one. The name is also sometimes spelled Yahweh. So, verse 3, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. He's pretty blunt about what he expects, right? No other gods. And he said, this does not mean God's people are permitted to have other gods. No, they're not. But yet, we have them today. We have other gods today. A lot of people, in one of my classes in seminary, and I got the biggest kick out of it, one of the examples was this guy, his lawn. Every weekend, he would be out there, mowing it properly. His lawn was like the best in the world. He had the best grass seed, and everything about it was beautiful. Everything was the way it was supposed to be, and he made it into a god. He spent more time in his garden. He didn't go to church, but he had that beautiful lawn, And a lot of the people in the class kind of snickering about this and all that. But, I mean, it was a normal example of how we take normal things in our lives and make them into gods. But we're not supposed to do that, you know? Okay. It says also, for verse 5, in a carved image. The people of Moses' day frequently made statues of animals or mythical gods to whom they prayed and worshiped. The Israelites themselves would soon make a golden calf, even as Moses was on the mountain speaking with God. Absolute censure of idolatry and false worship was what God was doing. Now, bow down, and verse 5 talks about bow down to them nor serve them. Bowing before something indicates a person is submitting himself to that idol's authority. I'm at verse 5 in your book. And we risk making anything an idol when we give it authority in our lives, or allow something to determine our daily schedule, or make something a top financial priority. And God, He's a jealous God. He tells you that. The Lord is passionately protective of His people, and His anger burns toward anyone or anything that tries to draw away their worship. And He goes on to say, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children. This does not mean children are punished for their parents' sins, which in fact is forbidden according to God's law. Rather, it means the sin of idolatry will affect a person's children for several generations. A man who worships something besides the one true God will pass on the idolatry to his children, and God's judgment will also last for several generations. So the bottom line here is, in today's world, if parents go to church every Sunday or on a regular basis and they take their kids, that's a good thing, right? But what if they don't? So are the kids going to find God if they're not exposed to it? Probably not. Maybe as they get older, they could, which it happens a lot. You know, I will say this: when I was children's ministry director, I was always down at the other end of the building where we had Sunday school, and I rarely had, and this surprised me actually, had a parent come and just drop their kid off and leave. One. And I was children's ministry director for 5 years. And that surprised me because I really expected that a lot. Now, the parents would come and drop their kids off for Sunday school and then go to church. But I had one, just one, on a regular basis that would drop their child off and leave and then come back.
You mean go home?
Yeah. So that's a good thing. But, you know, that's what it means. It doesn't mean he's punishing the next generation or whatever. It just means that they're not aware. I mean, they're going by what they saw and were taught. And so it affects generation after generation. If you know, so we have to think about that as parents. You know, we're all parents in here, and you know, and he goes on and says, those who hate me. The Lord made a black and white distinction here. Anyone who does not worship Him, anyone who allows an idol to take precedence in his life, hates God. No one can serve two masters. We've all heard this. Jesus later confirmed, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. And this comes from Matthew 6:24. Okay. He talks about in verse 6, thousands. God's judgment would fall on idolaters to the third and fourth generation, but his mercy would be lavished on thousands. This underscores that God's mercy is far greater and far more frequent than his wrath. So, going through verse 7, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. We take the name, verse 7, this is the second commandment. Take the name of the Lord your God in vain. The Lord had revealed his name to Moses, and he would soon reveal his glory. These gifts, however, brought responsibility to God's parents. We are permitted to know his name, but we are equally forbidden to abuse that name. Such abuse includes anything that will bring disrepute to his character, such as making false claims or promises. And sometimes it's a very simple. One of the things that I kept seeing during the baseball playoffs is these big red signs that they have, OMG. That's using God's name in vain. And yet it's broadcast over the world. And I forget what team it is.
Mets.
Is it Mets?
I think it was.
I think you're right. Yeah, I was, every time I see it, it bothers me. And when you're texting, they use it a lot in texting. OMG. And yet, going on.
There's some people that translate it to, oh my goodness.
That's what I
Okay.
do.
But isn't that,
Or, oh my gosh,
my
and I'll
girl,
write it out.
but goodness, it's kind of the same as saying God. I mean, I know we all say it, but I've thought about all those different things that we say, and it's like, it still comes down to where actually there's synonyms for God.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I mean,
that just was,
and that's
me,
really getting
it just hit me right in the face watching the ball game, and there it is. I mean, there are letters that are this
Yeah, I
big,
won't use
and the
OMG.
signs, and
I'll write
everybody's holding them up.
gosh,
And
and
I
I
saw
write
that,
the
but I
gosh
never
out.
heard
Yeah.
anybody say
My girlfriend
that
writes
is what that stood for.
G/D, but she's
Well,
Jewish,
no,
and they
right.
go in and say.
Say the word of God.
But if you
Yeah.
text, if anybody
I have
texts,
that
I mean, you
right
know
there,
what it
right here.
stands for.
But I was never quite sure with those signs, because Mets is an M.
Well, that's true, but
I
I
couldn't figure
just,
out what it would be.
Oh, Mets go.
I have no clue.
I don't know.
But it bothered me to
I don't
see it
watch
so
it.
much. I mean,
I'm
it's
mad at
blatant
Verizon.
out there. Okay, the third Ten Commandments.
One more thought on that there. You know how there's, when you do the confession, they say sins that you know you've done and ones that you don't know.
Yeah.
That might be a don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's true.
Or don't realize.
Well, that's another thing too. I mean, that's one thing I always told my confirmation kids. When you're asking for forgiveness, you don't know all the sins you've done. None of us do. In a day, in an hour. I mean, we think we're sinless. Most of the. Oh, I didn't sin today. Well, forget it. You did.
I worked with a lady who said she never sinned, she never did anything.
Oh, I had a
Yeah, right.
I love when people say
And
that.
then
I had a sin, I'm a good person.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, where does she go? She goes to that Baptist church up on 22.
But I told her whenever you
This one was
pray.
a Methodist.
Oh, well, this was where they stand at the Christmas tree. and they sing,
Oh,
but she'll
yeah.
talk about
Oh, it's that
anybody.
big church.
Oh,
Oak
I've
Grove.
been out of time,
Oh,
yeah.
Grove,
Oak
yeah.
Grove.
Yeah, Oak
Yeah.
Grove.
Yeah.
But to your point, Joyce, if you say,
My
oh
son
my goodness,
used to
I mean, that's our attempt, I do it,
Christmas
to not cuss.
I know, but it could almost be, cause there's other ones, I can't think of it now that people say, I mean, including me, and I always think, I think that is almost the same thing. as
You know what we
saying-
taught
just
my
making-
grandson to say? We taught him to say, "Oh my dude."
Oh,
So he didn't say OMG. So he says, "Oh my dude,"
But I
which
think
we've
we're
all
making-
started saying now.
Yeah, we're making a conscious effort to try not to
Right.
sin.
Right,
Because
right.
we realize it.
Yeah.
But is it good enough? Is that, I mean, how technical
I'm
do
not
we
a
wanna get?
judge.
Well, I guess if you,
I have to think of them as I live life between now and next week, I'll think there's more of them like
because
that.
later on in the Ten Commandments, you can sin by just thinking the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So it's immediately, OMG comes to mind, then you go, oh, I just thought the wrong thing.
Well, I think if
So
you
you
have
brought-
the feeling that you're saying the wrong thing,
Well,
like
that's another,
letting,
you know,
letting that guide you a little bit.
yeah.
But I think the focus of the author here is that this commandment speaks to not making an oath based on the
So help me God.
Lord's name.
Yeah. So help me God.
Yeah.
And you put your hand on the Bible, which now they didn't do.
But if you're
it.
just talking among each other, let your yes be yes, your no be no, so don't bring God into it. And that's how, he doesn't even talk about what we consider cussing.
No. He doesn't. Okay, going on. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. Neither you, nor your son or daughter, nor your manservant or maidservant, nor your animals, nor the alien within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them. But he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. That's the third commandment. Now, in Lutheran Church, the first three commandments are how we're to, our relationship with God, okay? And then the next 7, which I will clarify because ours are different than the Catholics, it's our relationship with our neighbor. But the first 3 are our relationship with God. So, we're supposed to never have any gods before him, but him. We're not to use his name in vain, and we're to remember the Sabbath day. And why is our Sabbath day Sunday?
I think through Jewish history that I remember reading, that the Gentiles wanted to separate themselves from the Jewish Sabbath when the church was first being established.
That might be,
I thought it
but that's
was-
not the reason.
That's when Jesus was resurrected.
Yeah,
Correct.
that's the reason it was Sunday and not
Right.
Saturday.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. Because Jesus' resurrection was on a Sunday, so that became our Sabbath day. And you'll find, even in Scripture, where the Jewish Christians still might have done their mass, or had their procedure that they did on Saturday or Friday night and Saturday because they're Jews, but then they had their Sabbath
Saturday.
on Sunday. Okay, moving forward.
What about, I think this is very interesting, 10 here in the book.
Where?
Yeah, about working day of rest because of our bodies. but-
Okay. On it you shall not do any work. Well, I remember as a kid,
Blue law.
nothing was open
Yeah, we had
on
new laws.
Sunday, except for restaurants and drugstore. And the drugstore could only sell things that had to do with,
Prescriptions.
medications or things like that, had to do with health. I mean, they would be open, but, and if you might wanna go in and get a comic book, tough luck, you have to wait a month, you know, that's the way it was. And people didn't work on Sundays.
But that's not what I'm talking about.
Well, then I'll read it, because I have it all highlighted.
Mhm.
Jesus would later warn against legalistic observation of the law, including this Sabbath law. The Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. That comes out of Mark. Significantly, the command to observe the Sabbath is not repeated in the New Testament, whereas the other 9 of the 10 Commandments are. In fact, it's clearly nullified, meaning it no longer is binding for God's people, because it was specifically intended for Israel during the Mosaic economy. The Sabbath mandate does not directly apply to believers today. I have at the bottom, and I got this, I think, out of my commentary. The command to remember the Sabbath requires a person to use a portion of the day dedicated to worship and service to God. But apparently we're, according to our writer, our author here, I have never heard this before, that it doesn't apply to believers today. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah,
Like,
I don't
hey.
know whether.
I mean, I realize there are jobs today where you have to work. I mean, nurses, doctors. I mean, there's all kinds of different people. Because the world's different now than it was back then. But that's why I wrote in here, the command to remember the Sabbath requires a person to use a portion of the day dedicated to worship and service to God. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be in church. Right?
That's what it did, yeah.
I mean, you can do your service to God outside of the church, and you can worship outside of the church. But you're supposed to use part of the day to do that. And whether you're in church or not. I mean, I'm sure well, think of the people that live stream. They're not in church. You know, they're sitting in front of their computer, right? Or I guess some people can project it to their TV or something. You know, but I did highlight that because I found it unusual. I've never heard that before. Let me tell you, I mean,
Yeah, I know.
I found that interesting. Okay, verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Okay, I'm going to ask you this. This is the 4th commandment. When is there a time that you wouldn't honor your parent? When? And there is.
If they're abusive,
If they're teaching you like a life of crime, that sort of thing, if they're leading you
Going against
against
God's
God.
word.
Yeah. For instance, I think I mentioned this before, but I had this video that I would show the confirmands. It was the father, and he's sitting at the kitchen table, and his son's a teenager, and he's drinking. He's got a bottle of beer in his hand, and he tells his son to go down the block and get a 6-pack for him. And the kid says, no. And the father says, you will do as I say. And he says, no, I'm not old enough to buy beer. I'm not going to break the law. Now, did he dishonor his father?
No.
No. And that's the one time And, you know, I mean, if they're, and also, and you know, somebody who said about abuse. I mean, that's a good point. I mean, if you're being abused and you do whatever's necessary to get away from that abuse, I don't think that's being dishonored. You know, you're dishonoring the parent because they're dishonoring you. I mean, they're treating you
That-
in a wrong way.
Bingo, right there.
Yeah, and so, no. But, whenever they're asking you to do something that's against the law or it's hurtful to you, then, no, you don't have to honor that. But I like what it says in here. It includes the elements of obeying our parents when we are young and caring for them when they are old. The key to societal stability is reverence and respect for parents and their authority. But that doesn't mean that if they take their authority past where it's right, then no. That your days may be long. The appended promise primarily related the command to life in the promised land and reminded the Israelites of the program God had set up for him and his people. This is the only commandment with a promise. And the promise is that your days may be long. And at the bottom of that paragraph, the scripture from Ephesians 6, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment, with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. Okay, 13.
I like one thing about it. Within the borders of the Israelites' territory, God expected them not to tolerate juvenile delinquency,
Yeah.
which at heart is overt disrespect for parents and authority. And in
Yeah,
Baltimore City,
I thought of
a
that,
lot of places
That
in the
was good.
state could use that.
yeah. We're reading Amish books where they would use the Donny house for the grandparents. As they grew older, they would build that house on the main house. But the kids were disciplined, and I thought, wow, with wooden spoons. And they'd have little faces on them, even at 2 years old. You want to get spanked? And it was a fear tactic to listen to your parents. A little wooden spoon with 2 eyes on it. Then they'd bring that spoon out.
Well, I've heard of parents using wooden spoons as a paddle,
Yeah.
you know.
Forsythia branch.
But
I can-
My mother used a Forsythia branch, her grandmother, and that
Well,
got passed down.
I
You
know,
take the blossoms off and everything, it's like a whip. And right
I
across the
bet.
back of your, oh, yes, yes. I only needed that once and I knew better.
wow.
I never hit either one of my kids. That doesn't mean they didn't get punished. But even as, you know, I mean, sometimes, you know, I'll see people, they'll just tap the little kid, you know, they have this big thick diaper on, right, or something. Never even did that. Now, my husband was a little different. He did the tapping. But, I mean, he was not forceful or, you know, he didn't hit them that they flew across the floor or anything. He was, you know, but I can honestly say I never hit my kids. I never found that I was not the disciplinary necessarily in our family. You shall not murder. This is the 5th commandment. And in verse 13 it says, Jesus would remind people of this law and teach them undue anger is no better. Remember that. Jesus added his own perspective on the commandments when he taught. And one of the things is anger. And anger that is unwarranted. That doesn't mean we can't be angry. It just, if it's warranted, it's okay. If it's not warranted, then it's a sin. It's just, you're breaking that 5th commandment. And so, You have heard that it is said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without cause shall be in danger of the judgment. That comes out of Matthew chapter 5. And later on, John wrote, whoever hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. That's from 1 John. And 14, you shall not commit adultery. This command, which was applicable to both men and women, protected the sacredness of the marriage relationship. Jesus took this commandment seriously and taught that lust in the heart was equal to adultery in the body. You shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with his heart. Matthew 5. That's the 6th commandment. You shall not steal. This is the 7th commandment. Any dishonest acquiring of another's goods or assets greatly disturbs the right to ownership of private property, which is an important principle of societal stability. Nothing changed with regard to theft between the old covenant and the new. Let him who stole steal no longer, Paul wrote, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. That comes out of Ephesians. That's the 7th commandment. You shall not give false testimony against the neighbor. That is the 8th commandment. False testament basically is a lie. Justice is never served by untruthful testimony. Jesus taught the penchant to lie against one's neighbor comes straight from the man's heart and defiles him. But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. And that comes out of Matthew 15. Covet. It says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife or his manservant or maidservant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. The Lutherans make this into 2 commandments. The 9th commandment is do not covet your neighbor's house. And then 10 is do not covet your neighbor's things, like do not covet your neighbor's wife or his manservant or maidservant.
That's Lutheran viewpoint.
Yes. But it's a lot of different, it's different than the Catholics. I read that in my commentary. I should have written it all out, but I didn't. So, reading on to the end. When the people saw the thunder and lightning and heard the trumpet and saw the mountain in smoke, they trembled with fear. They stayed at a distance and said to Moses, speak to us yourself and we will listen, but do not have God speak to us or we will die. Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. God has come to test you so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. The people remained at a distance while Moses approached the thick darkness where God was. The thundering and the lightning, the Lord made his presence known through powerful symbols, both audible and visible. The people witnessed terrific thunderclaps and lightning flashes, terrifying trumpet blasts, and a thick smoke that engulfed the top of Mount Sinai. The presence of God is a frightening thing to sinful men and women. Christians can enter His presence boldly and confidence only because, why? We're covered by the blood of the Lamb, His Son, Jesus Christ. Without Christ, God's presence would be terrible and deadly. Verse 19, let not God speak with us, lest we die. This was not because the Lord was angry with the people, but simply because He was holy and they were not. We're all sinners, and we cannot go to the Father except through Jesus. 20, it says, so that you may not sin. It is purifying to be reminded of the awful, inspiring holiness and power of God. It can be easy for Christians to take God's goodness for granted, indulging in sinful behavior and expecting a cheap grace. But Paul warned about this very inclination. What shall we say then? Shall we continue in sin that grace may abound? Certainly not. How shall we be died to sin, live any longer in it? Comes from Romans. So, okay, the questions. I found these interesting. Review the Ten Commandments and put each into your own words. What practical examples of each can you give from your own life? Okay, what commandments did you do? I rewrote 4.
Well, I said no other gods for us. This is things like money, power, etc.
Jobs, houses. I mean, there's a whole ton of things.
But then I added in, Catholics pray to saints.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
well, that's where we differ.
Yeah.
Well, and they also look at Mary a lot different than we do. Okay. Anybody else? What do you got?
Well, for the idols, I said, we're to walk by faith in the unseen, so we should not have a representation.
Mine are so much simpler. Anybody else? I'll share mine. Do not lie about anything. Do not want what others are and have. Do not kill someone with words or anger. And do not take something that is not yours or without paying for it. Okay.
I read a little reference that I thought, it says the 10 Commandments will not bring to you eternal life. It's just a way of God telling you how to live your life.
That's correct. Yep, very good. Question 2, what does it mean to honor one's parents, and how is that done as an adult?
You try to obey them as a child, and you take care of them as they get older.
And respect them when you're older.
Yeah.
You know, I think you can go through a bad period with your parents.
It's
When-
called teenage.
Yeah,
As a teenager, you certainly do.
but I think if everybody lives long enough, the parents live long enough, a lot of those things that were so horrible, by the time you get older, you can come back to respecting your parents. I think it's a process. So,
That's good.
No, I understand.
yeah, it's like, I don't wanna get into detail, but I could give details of Mary's life, but you know,
Well,
You
your
know,
siblings don't
as-
either.
As you get older, and it's not teenagers that they give you trouble all the time, trust me.
But it's a good,
Oh, listen, I have a prodigal daughter.
Well-
She's still doing it.
And, but as you get older in your life experiences, then you can look back and you can say,
they didn't know any
they didn't know any better, they thought they were doing, from their point of view, that was correct, and from my point of view, it was not.
Yeah.
Well, I had the pleasure of my son coming back to me and saying, Mom, you were right in what you said to me. He said, I know better of it now because he had kids of his own.
Interesting.
And that's a good feeling, to have your, one of your children come back and tell you, hey, you were right, Mom.
I almost dropped the phone the first time I heard that.
Pardon me?
yeah.
Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, I was floored.
Yeah,
So it told me they were listening, at least.
They took
And as
it
they
to
get
heart.
older, I hear it more.
Took it to
And I
heart.
still secretly turn around and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
You did something right.
our son, he compared, they don't have children, but he compares his upbringing with what he knows about his wife's upbringing, and he always says, it was so different at our house. And I always think,
Yeah.
he has said that several times, Mom, it was just so different at our house. And I always think that's why when he met his wife and she became like part of our family way before they got married, she was like so comfortable there because she wasn't seeing what she had going on at her house. And at first, like, she would tell me stuff and I just thought, she's just a teenager and she's exaggerating. But now
She
that we
was
know the
probably.
family so well, she was telling the truth.
yeah.
I mean, and I never let her think I didn't believe her. I just took it as teenage talk. But she was telling us the truth. And it's like, phew. I mean, she's still suffering from it. She's still suffering.
That's a shame.
It is.
Yeah.
It's a, and it's like, I mean, she lives a great life, her and are fine and all together, but you can see things, how she handles problems, and it's like, it all goes back. It just all goes back to
Yeah.
what, all the stuff that was going on in her house. It's just a shame.
Yeah. Well,
Because she's
when
never
you
calm.
think about, kids that are abused, and, and then they get older and they get married and have their own kids,
And it can continue.
it can continue. Yeah, because they don't know any better.
I do just the opposite,
Mhm.
really. I would never do to my kids that was done to me.
Well, that's the thing, you either learn
Never.
that you
Well, that's
don't
it.
learn
And
and you
I,
do it, or you
even to
teach,
this
you get
day,
taught not to.
But the fact that she got to see how you guys lived and everything,
Right.
that's helped her.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that doesn't mean that
Because
she doesn't struggle with what happened to her. but-
Because she's trying to live that kind of life with.
Right, right.
So, and it's like, he treated his children completely different, and his brother just followed exactly what he grew up with. And we just watched it, and it was like, didn't he learn anything? Poor kids.
don't.
And now he barely sees those kids. He
Yeah.
was just in the hospital. Not one kid showed up, and his sister had to go get him out of the hospital because he was taken there by ambulance. That he called himself. And when we're like, well, any of the kids coming over to the hospital? And it's like, who knows? And then when they were going to release him, sister went and brought him home. So not one kid showed up. And it's like, oh, God.
It's a
And you
shame.
just you watch history repeat over
Yeah.
and over. And we don't have a lot of contact with those kids to know what they're doing with their kids because the relationships are so broken.
Well, that's exactly what.
Yeah, the generation.
Well,
Yeah.
that's what they're saying.
Yeah, the generations.
Okay, question 3. What does it mean to covet? Give practical examples from modern life.
I took that as you're worrying over something you don't have. It could be jealousy, but you're not appreciating what you have. you know, my neighbor might have this fancy little GMC and
Yeah.
I ordered it and I did that and I had this Mustang that just looks like, but it still gets
Still
me
a
to
Mustang.
church. Oh, no, I didn't pick it out for that, but, and she gets very upset with me over my flowers. Because I'm the flower lady in the court, and she, well, we don't talk now.
But you do that for her enjoyment
I
too.
did it as when you pull into the court,
Yeah.
it's, you don't have stress. I mean, but to covenant over a flower when you can't appreciate what God has given you, you have to appreciate everything that you have. And if you're worried about my neighbor has this, you don't appreciate what God gave you. That's how I always think about it.
Fancy car.
Oh, they're a whip.
Yeah.
That's the one that called me up and cussed me out and goes to church because I didn't call her up and wish her a happy birthday. And then she called me back a month later for my birthday and told me she was a better person out of the two of us.
Oh, my.
Wow.
I've known her
She's
for
coming to you.
40 some years and she
That's
tried even a couple of weeks ago. Hello, Nancy. And I put my hand here and my hand up. I said, it's not there anymore, Audrey. It's not there. Oh, I'm sorry. I said, that's right. You're sorry. And it's not right, but you did it. And I just walked on. Because I'm not going to be talked to like that by her anymore. I stood my ground.
I have a friend like that.
Forgiveness,
Hmm?
forgiveness.
I forgave her the way God wanted me to. I said, God, oh, it's more to it than that.
Yeah, I have a friend that he actually cussed me out and hung up on me. on
That's
the
it.
phone.
She went after me and the
And-
phone disconnected.
And he told me who he was years ago, and I didn't pay attention.
it's the warning sign.
It was the warning sign, and I didn't realize it. And then to make my life better, it's just like, just leave me
It's
alone.
not here anymore. I told her that.
Yeah.
You destroyed her. I was her only friend in the court. And even the court said, I can't believe she talked to you like that. Her husband.
I
Came
forgave
over and
this fellow
apologized.
several times, and every time when he comes back, it was worse and worse and worse.
Yeah.
And he thinks he did nothing wrong.
And when did they get the impression that it was okay for you to talk to me like that? Because I was always really nice. So,
Okay, anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question,
But there
because
are-
I looked into coveting, like
Yeah?
really read about it. So is coveting when you want what somebody else has?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or you
Or
take
is it like, what if you have a desire for something? Is that different? I'll give you an example. My sister-in-law lives in Florida, right on the beach. And I'm like, oh.
in a bikini?
Well,
Well, I wanted to really get the visual of this.
Well, it's just this gorgeous beach she lives on, and I
Yeah.
really want to live at the beach. And I thought, wow, am I coveting because I want to live at the beach? I mean, I don't want what she has
It's
necessarily.
the same thing.
Is it the
in a
same
sense.
thing?
Yeah. She has it, you want it.
That's true.
Not necessarily her place, but
Yeah.
she has something you want.
Yes.
So yes, that's kind of coveting.
Yeah.
But you take it to
But you can covet lots of things.
I want lunch, but that's not coveting
That's what I'm saying.
Well, if it's
Yeah,
my
see,
lunch
I
you
don't-
want, it
I don't
is.
pay out of whack over.
Right, but
It's
that's
my lunch.
But isn't that the difference?
No.
Huh?
Isn't that the difference? If it's your lunch I want, that's coveting, right? But if
Yeah.
I just
Why
have a
can't you-
desire, is that
Yeah.
coveting?
I mean, you can want lunch, but if you see my lunch, like I had this beautiful pepperoni pizza in front of me,
Yeah,
and you want it,
then that's coveting.
Yeah.
Okay.
you know,
it. I'll just go buy
there's
my
so
own
many,
pizza.
I mean, there's so many different ways you can covet. You can have, you can covet someone's job. I mean, you work
Oh,
for a
that
company
too.
and there's this person who works there, not even in your department maybe, but you want that job.
Mhm.
And you don't, doesn't matter that you don't have the education, you need to do that,
You
but
just
you
want
want
it.
that job. That's coveting.
Well,
I mean,
Vicky,
there's so many different ways you can covet things.
Yeah.
It's, you want something and you want it so much
They're willing
that,
to do
and it's
anything.
really unattainable for you at that point in time. It just, well, I have it written here. It becomes an unhealthy obsession, is what it becomes.
Okay, what if you want more money too now? To help the poor, to give more to charity, to give more to church. I mean, not, oh, I want a mansion, I want a good car, you know, to help people. Is that, and not like, let me pat myself on the back, like, okay, you're giving it.
I read something.
well, the commentary in our Bible, which is probably the same, to covet is to wish to have the possessions of others. It goes beyond simply admiring someone else's possessions or thinking, I'd like to have one of those. Coveting includes envy, resenting the fact that others have what you don't. God knows, however, that possessions never make anyone happy for long. Since only God can supply all our needs, true contentment is found only in Him. When you begin to covet, try to determine if a more basic need is leading you to envy. For example, you may covet someone's success, not because you want to take it away from him, but because you'd like to feel as appreciated by others as he is. If this is the case, pray that God will help you deal with your resentment and meet your basic needs.
So it's okay to want that beach house.
You're not trying to take
Yeah.
her beach house, you just want your own.
It says,
Sometimes when we
resenting that
covet
others have it
something,
and you don't.
even though
That's
Yeah.
it might
Thank
be a
you.
good thing we wanna do, it'll lead us to do something wrong. So you have to be careful,
It's how you go after that desire.
that's
Yeah.
true,
It's a good point.
yeah. Okay, 4, why did Jesus say that lusting after another person is the same as committing adultery? Or that hating another person is the same as committing murder in one's heart? What implications does this teaching hold for our life?
Well, that story of Jimmy Carter, when they interviewed him, and, you know, he said he hasn't committed adultery, you know, physically, but he, you know, and I'm thinking of it in my heart, that I have committed adultery too, you know, I haven't done it. I've done- And I remember they interviewed him, and, you know, they made a big thing out of it.
Because people they're not Christians and they didn't understand where he was coming from. 'Cause when we heard that, we were like, oh no, because we knew people weren't understanding what he was saying. I mean, he's a Christian man and he's coming from that perspective, and other people
Yeah.
just, it's
Right.
like, the things that become big scandals. It's ridiculous.
Well, okay,
And they've just mentioned that again recently because of his 100th birthday. They always have to bring that up whenever they talk about it.
that's ridiculous.
Oh, yeah, because I.
And bring
I
up
heard
how he stood there and helped build that house while his hand was shaking.
it.
And
Oh, yeah.
somebody had their arm around him. I saw that picture and I thought, bless his heart. You know, and they were holding him so he could get there.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, moving on. Living by the 10 Commandments will not bring eternal life. What I have highlighted here is almost, well, it's a lot. But the law could not save anyone because animal sacrifices and behavioral rules cannot change the heart or make final atonement for sin. I have this highlighted and underlined. Only the blood of Christ, God's perfect sacrificial lamb, can provide forgiveness for man's sin and reconciliation with a holy God. Paul taught that the law was given to God's people to make them fully aware of their sinful state. And at the bottom, what purpose does the law serve? It was added because of transgressions, till the seed should come to whom the promise was made. If there had been a law given which could have given life, truly righteousness would have been by the law. But the scripture has confined all under sin, that the promise by faith in Jesus Christ might be given to those who believe. But before faith came, we were kept under guard by the law, kept for the faith which would afterward be revealed. Therefore, the law was our tutor to bring us to Christ, that we might be justified by faith. But after faith has come, we are no longer under a tutor. Galatians. The Ten Commandments are still valid for Christians today. God gave the law as a temporary measure to enable his people to enter his presence and live in obedience to his will. The death and resurrection of Christ represented the final atonement for sin, and it is only through faith in Christ that anyone can find peace with God. And if we look down in the middle paragraph there, it says, Jesus came to fulfill the law by providing free access into the presence of God through his final sacrifice. And he gave us his Holy Spirit to enable us to fulfill the principles of godliness. The principles outlined in the Ten Commandments in our own lives. Those principles of godly behavior are as important today as they were in Moses' day. And at the bottom, all of God's law is summarized by two greatest commandments. A young man once asked Jesus, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus answered, you shall love your Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourselves. On these two commandments hang the law and the prophets. And these two commandments fulfill the Ten Commandments. The first one represents the first three, and the second one, the last seven. The Ten Commandments fall into these two categories. Some of them spell out what it means to love God with our whole hearts, souls, and minds, while others give practical ways of loving our neighbors as ourselves. Together, these two principles summarize what it means to live a godly life. Question 5. Review the Ten Commandments and place them into these two categories. Love God with all your heart. What are the ones that go under that?
No other gods before me, no idols, don't take the Lord's name in vain, and remember the Sabbath. That's love God with all your heart.
Right. And love your neighbors as yourself. What goes under there?
The rest of
Honor your father.
The rest of
Rest of
That's
them.
right. It is. Yeah, starting with honor your father and mother, and it goes all the way through to do not covet. Okay, I'm not doing question 6. That's,
Yeah, I didn't do that either.
yeah. Question 7. What does it mean to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind?
I could follow God's precepts and don't give in to personal desires rather than following God.
Anything else?
I just say he comes first
Yeah.
in everything.
He should be the center of your life.
To be thankful for all things.
Yeah.
Not to doubt, but accept hardship.
Yeah. Well, and I also had that it means to live a godly life. Question 8. What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? How does this compare with the culture's emphasis on self-esteem and self-fulfillment?
you don't think you're better than someone else.
Don't be selfish.
Yeah, I wrote respectful, kind, caring. When you have interaction to receive their respect.
Yeah.
Don't judge.
Anything else? I have to do unto others as you would have them do
Yeah.
unto you.
Or if you
And,
can't say something
and
nice, don't
cultural
say nothing at
dictates-
all.
Cultural dictates all on self, which makes us selfish, lacking compassion, and living only for oneself. Okay. Okay, next,
Can you
Next
give
week-
I didn't student in it.
we're gonna move real fast here. We're going to, chapter 33.
I don't